find the team members before you actually need them. I think it's a critical. I think oftentimes people are too reactive in building a team, meaning like, oh, I just realized I needed a bricklayer, so therefore I'll go hire them. But or I just realized I need a manager here, and by then, like by the time you put out the ad, hire, like you've already wasted so much time and productivity. I think what you should be doing is always, I have this mantra, which is always be looking. All right, so here's the thing. I think one of the most important things in life that I've learned over the years, Jim, and I'm not sure if you have felt the same way, but it's like, I think that when we're younger, we have this tenacity to want to just think, I can do this on my own. Like there's that rugged individualism that you beat you on yourself and just like, I can do this on my own. You push and push and push. And there's a point in, I think, everybody's life where you just start to going, I can't do this alone. Like this is just hard work doing this alone. And that's when we kind of, there's this thing that switches in your gear in your head that's like, you know what, this is be so much more fun and better and easier if I actually built a team around me. And this is what I think we want to talk about today is the format of how do you build a team, how do you lead a team, how do you really guide a team and train a team. I think that's the topic of today. So Jim, tell me, maybe I'll ask you a first question maybe to start thinking. How important do you think a team is in your life, personally and also professionally, or?
Laurence, this topic could go in so many different directions. To answer your question specifically, paramount, so important. That I'm reminded of the African proverb, the one that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. And it really epitomizes for me because in the earliest part of my career, I did exactly what you talked about. I had, whether it was just drive, initiative, I could basically just get things done and myself, but I realized that it wasn't either scalable or sustainable, because for me to keep growing, I had to put, I didn't have a multiplier effect in my influence, in my impact, because it all came down to me. And a really big shift, if I wanted to work harder, I had to work at 130% of my capacity, which is not sustainable. And it was once I realized that the power of the team, we could then leverage our efforts to a multiplier effect, 100 times what I could do by myself with the power of the team.
It's not to say, I think it's really important to say that, is not to say that you can't do anything alone, right? But there's leverage in a team, a partnership. And it's like this podcast, right? Like we could individually do a podcast alone, but it's so much more fun. And, doing it with you and also too, like there's the ideas and the conversation, the dynamics changes when there's another person involved. And so I think it speaks the same thing when it comes to business, where can you have a business all on your own? Yeah, of course. But there's some benefits to a massive benefit. I think a scalable benefit where it comes down to when you build the team. And I'm not just talking about profit or just, work done. I think it's all productivity. It's actually just also there's different dynamics when it comes to what you're able to create when you're working as a team. And I think this is, and we'll maybe dive into that in a second, but also too, and let's not forget, a team in a relation, in a personal life is just as important. Like it's, of course, like, it's easy to, you can actually live your life. I mean, I was single for a long time. And then when you bring a partner, right, having the right team member, like my wife, changes the dynamics of that and leverage. And, and I think that's the same realm. It's whether it be personal or professional, it helps to have a team together, I find.
Yeah, I love the whole home team example that you talked about, Laurence, because fundamentally, that's great. We have a home family team and obviously a life team, business team, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a really good point that you make, because when you talk to a lot of people, I remember a financial advisor once coming talking to us while we were still students and says, "Look, let me give you some advice." And we went, "Okay, we're ready to jot things, bit of wisdom down that he had." He said, "Listen, choose your partners carefully." And We were like, what are you talking about? I thought you were going to give us the next hot tip in the investment. He goes, no, look, from a guy who's been married and separated 3 times, the team that you and the partnership that you set up with your partner is a really important one. So I think that's I hadn't even considered that as an avenue of team, but I'm really glad that you've had that, because fundamentally that's the biggest, most important foundational team that as a bedrock has been really helpful in our success as well.
Yeah, it's the foundation team that
Yeah,
that sets up the other teams, right? So,
yeah,
and it's so important. And again, like I want to be very clear. It doesn't mean that you can't, be single and be successful. I'm just saying, like choosing the one life partner and the right partner you want to experience life with. It's one of the most important decisions. And then we kind of talked about in our last podcast. With you celebrating your 30th, wedding
yeah.
anniversary, like that. That bedrock is what changes the dynamics and the direction of who you are today. I have no doubt you credit your wife to becoming the man you are, and I do too. And without our significant others, would not have accomplished anywhere close to where we are without them in our lives.
Mm.
And in their roles are so significant, and I would imagine that they'll be the same. They would say the same thing. Well, I hope so anyways, but
Yep. Yep.
yeah.
100%. 100%.
All right, so let's talk about like the first thing. I think we established the fact that number one, yes, the fact is having a team is so much more fun, more leverage, and increased productivity and all. I mean, everybody knows that. But here's the problem: how do you build a team? Like that, I think that's
Yeah.
the one of the most challenging things, I think. So let's start with some of the highlights of what we think requires to build a team. So Jim, I'll start with you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a really great book that set the foundation for me for this was The E Myth, and by Michael Gerber. And that was a really great book because it highlighted that when you're in your business, there are 3 specific roles or hats that you need to wear at some stage. There's the technician, there's the manager, and then there's the entrepreneur or visionary. And when you're doing it by yourself, like you said, it's not that you can't do it, but you have to allocate equal parts to each part of those roles. You can't just focus on the technical side only with the expectation that your deal flow or your pipeline or your next client is taken care of. And that's probably one of the biggest disconnects for a lot of people who think that what I do should be enough. And in the perfect world, you'd put your shingle up and that would be great. However, for you to prepare for bringing on a team, what you take for granted and you just do, you need to allocate documents so that the next person coming along has an idea of how they can add value as opposed to just being all in the head. So I'm going to
Yeah.
start off with that as a starting point of getting those clear distinctions. For me was really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So I like that a lot, and I read that book when I was a student, and that was about
Mm.
20 years ago, and it definitely
Yeah,
influenced me a lot. I think let's carry on with that. I think the entrepreneurial part of what Michael Gerber talks about, which is what you said alluded to, was the visionary. I
yeah,
think building a team
yeah,
requires you to have some clarity of a vision of what you're trying to build. There's no point
yeah,
building a team for building a team's sake without a clarity of
yeah,
exactly what you're trying to build. It's almost like, hey, I want to build a house, but I don't know what the house looks like. And so you just get a
yeah,
bunch of people just start working on things. But then if you don't actually have a plan, if you don't have the architectural plans of what you're trying to build or what is at least going to look like at the end of it, what's the point of having a team? You're just really
yeah,
creating jobs for people, and then all of a sudden you're creating a position where you're a great employer, but with no direction.
yeah,
And so I think
yeah,
building a team
yeah,
requires you to fundamentally know exactly what you're trying to build, and then two, which is then going, who do I need, right?
yeah,
To help me create that vision. And I think that's
yeah,
how you build a team, is that you have to have the vision of where you want to go, but then you have to have the vision of who are the components that will actually help you. Because there's no point hiring say a carpenter if your house doesn't require any woodwork. So it's like
yeah.
hiring the right people for the right vision that you actually have.
Yeah, and you've got to have the complementary skills that support that. So if we use Michael Gerber's example and that as a frame, where I'm glad you mentioned about home team, because here is where it's really worked very well for us as a family, Bettina and I, because she has skills that amplify anything that I can do and are very complementary. So in Michael Gerber's example, you've got the technician, basically the manager, and the visionary by natural default, my areas that I love spending most of my time in were always the visionary things. And and I like doing things up until the point where I realized I want to focus more on the vision. But the problem is you can stay in visionary land all the time and you blue sky and you can get around other people who are visionaries and it's awesome, it's great. You use all the oxygen up in the air, but you get nothing done. And so what Bettina was able to do for us, because that's a specific skill set she has, is she was able to create a process and a system and manage the vision to break it down so that it could be actioned. Because if it was only just for me, and this is part of the whole thing that I'll share as we're going on. I enjoyed the technical side of it, and I felt I was very good at that. I was great at the vision. I could see where we were going, but I sometimes didn't have the systems and the scalability amplifiers that allowed the vision to come to fruition.
Building a team needs that complementary elements, and that's why that clarity of the vision and the clarity of the people who you need is going to be so important. I think the challenge, I think, when building a team is about building the team in the right manner. I'll
Yeah,
add to we'll just keep on riffing on like what are some of the elements. These are not in any particular order. I think it's also too is like find the team members before you actually need them. I
yeah,
think it's a critical. I think oftentimes people are too reactive in building a team, meaning like, oh, I just
yeah,
realized I needed a bricklayer, so therefore
yeah,
I'll go hire them. But or oh, I just realized I need a manager here, and by then, like by the time you find, put out the ad, hire, like you've already wasted so much time and productivity. I think
yeah,
what you should be doing is always, I have this mantra, which is always be looking, like always be
yeah.
looking for great people.
Correct.
And to me, and we'll get into this maybe in the hiring part, is that it's never about the skill. To me, I'm always looking for the personality and the character of the person and the drive. If they have that, I
Yeah,
almost, like there was one girl that I really liked in our local grocery store, Kohl's, in back in Newport, and she was just switched on. You can just tell she had a great, strong work ethic. You knew that this was a part-time job for her while she's going through school or something. I never really asked her background story until much later, but every time I showed that store, she would be the one who would go out of her way to make sure that the lines were as short as possible. If she saw us like in line at like 3 deep, she will open a new lane just to make sure that there's like
yeah,
efficiency. Like you can just tell someone constantly looking out. I'm like, and I wasn't hiring anything, but in my mind, I'm like, I'm trying to find like, how can I find a position for her? Right. I don't know what that
yeah,
position is,
yeah,
but how do I find
yeah,
that position for her? And as soon as I got to know her, it was a little bit like she was in school and what she was studying. But that's what I mean. It's like, where can you constantly look for people, good character people? Those are hard to find.
yeah,
Skills, we can train them. It's
yeah.
characters that I'm looking for. And I think so. My advice is always be looking, find people before you need them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing, and having an awareness, identifying talent and identifying characteristics that you then cannot, yeah, as you said, identify. Because if you're looking for a specific role, then that comes with so many different people's interpretation of how to do that role. That isn't necessarily complementary to what you're looking for. So I love that. I love what you're saying. There's actually we do the same thing. We'd go to the major shopping centres and we'd take our car into the valet service, and there were people. There were two or three people that we'd come across and go, "Oh, we would hire them in a heartbeat," because they had this awareness for a front of office role or a customer service role. They were phenomenal in it. You probably, and I think this is a really important distinction, is that the girl you were talking about, you would want to amplify her natural skill set and not necessarily put her in charge of accounts receivable where that talent may not be manifested to its highest expression. So I think it's a case of identifying talent, which is really important, and also putting them in roles that actually suit that and allow that natural brilliance to come through. Because these people were brilliant in that front of house role. They may not have been as great doing an accounts receivable role. So I think the next iteration of that is always looking for people and then thinking about where they can do their best work within your organization.
It's so true. Like, and I love that part because it's such an important element is finding the right people for the right role. And
Yeah,
so there's an analogy that I've heard from, and I wish I can give credit to, where where this comes from. I can't remember exactly, but it's like finding the maybe it's good to great. I can't remember if it's from Jim Collins or not, but it's like it's that having the vision of where we're going to go. We talked about that already, so that's where the bus is supposed to be going, right? And each bus, which is the business you have, has respective seats assigned, and that
Yeah.
seat is the role of that particular person. So each seat has a
Yeah.
different role, and really, it's about being very clear and going, hey, this bus number 11 is going this way. It's going this direction, right? And it's going north. And then, but it's like each seat has a specific spot. So if you want to come and join this team, if you want to go to this, going north to say, I don't know, let's just go say we're going to Broome. And if
Yeah.
that's where you want to go to, come on board. But if you're going to sit on that seat, make sure you're going to do that role. If you don't want to be on board, if you don't like where we're going, if you don't like this bus being black, black colored, and it's like, or it's going this direction, then don't get on the bus. Like, there's the door. It's okay. We'll find someone else in the role. So it's like, if you're going to occupy a space in this bus, be very, very clear, right, that you are part of this team to perform that role on that seat. And I think that's really
Yeah.
important from your perspective on what you just said.
Yeah, totally. And it reminds me, there's a band. I'm not sure if you ever came across them. They're called Sig Sputnik. Did you ever come across them?
No, I haven't.
Okay. What's unique about these guys is that there was someone who said, we can teach anybody anything. So what there was this experiment where they tried to form a band with people who looked like a drummer who couldn't play drums. And they figured, you look like a drummer, you look like a guitarist, you look at this, we can teach you that. And they formed this band around people who looked like they had all the elements of what a great basically guitarist would look like, and they taught them the skills. So it highlights what you're basically saying is that hire for attitude, train for skill.
That's awesome. That's a great story. That's a great story. All right, so I think we talked about several elements of building a team. Like I think the next challenge would be like, how do you lead a team? Let's talk about some of the components of leading a team, because that is I think where, well, first of all, like building a team is important. Actually, no. Let's before we go into leading the team, I think what we need to do is hiring a team member. What are some of your best practice about hiring teams? Like, this is where most people get it wrong. So if you don't get the right vision, you don't get the right people, you don't get the right complementary skills, that's a problem. If you don't know those, that's a problem. So, but then you go, okay, now I know those things, but then they screw it up by hiring the wrong person for the wrong role. So, or hiring the wrong person in general. We kind of touched a little bit upon this. So let's kind of go with there. What are your best practices for hiring?
Well, before I get to best practices, I want to talk about worst practices, because a lot of the times that's how you get better at doing that, right? So anything that I've learned from experiences, sometimes it has been because of bad decisions, bad choices earlier on. I think when I first started, it was like, hey, this is what I'm like. If someone was excited or I liked them, then I went, okay, you have the elements of what would be a great team member. So I think that didn't work. I basically wasn't clear enough on the specific skill sets that I was looking for in someone, the characteristics, the character traits, and also how they could complement what we were looking for. So to me, that was the biggest learning. So as a practice, I had to get really, really clear on what I was looking for, why, and how to basically test and measure that competency moving forward.
Yeah. So when I hire, there's there's three rules that I kind of hire through, and they're filtered in that specific order. So the first rule of thumb for me is that I have to, like what we already talked about. I know beating this, continuously from various points, but I'm hiring for personality and characteristic, and that personality has to suit the job, the characteristic, and also the drive. If the person has no drive, I don't care how nice of a person they are. I'm not hiring a nice person because they're nice. That's one of the worst. I made that mistake many times. It's about hiring for the right drive, because if they don't have the drive, then I'm just carrying them. I'm just creating a job so that they can be, employed and supporting their family and not mine. So, which is not ideal. And that's what I think a lot of people end up doing. And so number one is that we're hiring for that first. Now, the second thing I think, so once they pass through, if they're the right personality, the right characteristics of something I want, okay, now they go through the second ring. Okay, so then the second level, then what I'm looking for now is being very specific, going, where's the proof of that? Okay, where's the evidence? Show me from the past in your life history and experience that what I see in your personality, or what you say your personality is there proof of that, right? Because of course, if you ask someone like, oh, so what are your strengths, or what are your weaknesses, or if you ask someone who's like, can you handle adversity? They can say all the nice. I mean, I would,
Yeah.
right? If I was getting interviewed,
Yeah.
I've been in many interviews. Of course, I'm going to say all the things I feel like you want to hear. But where's the proof? Because here's the
Yeah.
thing: just because I say something doesn't mean that my actions match that. I want to know from the people that I'm hiring that the action is aligned with what they're saying. Okay, I can say let's kind of use it. If I say I don't know, I'm gonna pick an example. I'm a strong Christian. Let's just say I'm a strong Christian. Okay, right? I believe in God, da, 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 and I know I've dedicated my life, da, 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 right? But if you, but the action says, you don't go to church on a regular basis, or you don't like, you're not nice to people, or your behavior doesn't match that, then whatever you say has no credibility. And so that's my second level. The second level is like, where's the proof? Show me through your history and through a conversation. The questions I would ask is to try to dig at that. Okay. You said you have drive. Show me, what have you done? Like, what have you done in your resume? What have you done in the past in projects where you actually demonstrated drive, or efficiency, or productivity, or just self-efficiency? Like, those are the things I'm kind of looking for, right? Once I get past that level, okay, you have proof in your characteristic, you have proof and evidence. Then the third level is like, okay, do you have the minimum skills I need? Right. So remember, that skills is not the first thing; it's the last thing I'm looking for. Do they have? If I'm hiring someone for the front of house and they need to work on a computer, well, I need some minimal skills on computer. Like, if you never don't even know how to turn on, like, I actually had a case where one of my clients is like, they were hiring someone and they're like, oh, I don't think this is the right person. And the minimum skill was obviously work on a computer. And when she started saying, goes, so where's the mouse? That's a problem, right? it's like, that's a problem. Like, they could be the nicest person, they might have
Yeah.
some proof of all that, but if you can't work on a computer and your job requires you work on a computer, okay, that might be an issue. So
Yeah.
that's where the skill set. If I'm looking for a chiropractor, well, you might be the nicest person, you might have drive, ambition, but if you have no skills to adjust, well, that's a potential, that's a
Yeah.
huge problem, right? Because there's a
Yeah.
minimum skill set that requires. So that's my sort of three levels of hiring, and obviously the questions and during the interview process is could try to gear towards trying to dig that out of someone.
Yeah. Great distinctions, Laurence, and really they come out of experiences where we may not have done that. I know I've had
Oh,
someone who,
absolutely.
as you said exactly the right things, said exactly, and being the visionary. Here's the thing: for visionaries, you get suckered in. If someone has the same in vision, you suddenly go, "Man, we're kindred spirits. We're on this path. We're going together." But I've had scenarios where who showed up at an interview is not the same person who showed up basically in the role. So that was a big reality check for me. And so you talked a little bit about leadership. I'm going to jump ahead and then come back. Is I had to identify where my blind spots were as a person who was recruiting people, because it couldn't be enough that, as you said, had those three skill sets. There was a critical component that I was missing that I had to really develop in myself. So in order to bring someone on to be part of the team, I had to get better at the skill of talent identification, and that
You,
was
you
really
mentioned
key.
something really interesting. Is like, we learn from all this through mistakes, and that's absolutely true. You can read all this stuff in a book. I'm sure we all read books, and like, honestly, you're not like, you learn from a book, but the reality is that the experience comes from when you actually hire the wrong person, or you go through the process of like just realizing like this is a lot harder than what a book
Yeah,
tells you. Um, and the reality is like the cost of hiring the wrong person is very costly. It's not just like the salary or the missed opportunity. It's like the retraining of this person. Like,
yeah,
it is about, I can't remember what the stat, there was like 5 times this person's salary, or 10
yeah,
times this
something
person's
like
salary,
that.
or
Yeah,
something like that. Can't remember his first name. Smart was his last name. I think he talked about that. Brad Smart, I think was his name. And he talked about like how a wrong hire can really derail your business. And that's why it's such an important aspect of hire slow, fire fast, right? That's the
yeah.
mantra that people kind of talk about.
Yeah, and the whole hiring and firing fast. I've been guilty of that one as well too, where you basically you look for the good in people, and I had kept people in roles much longer than they needed to be. So when you talk about the cost of rehiring, yeah, it's costly, But what does it cost you having the wrong person in your business for a lot longer than they need to? It's like you don't even want to think about what happened. So I've done them all. I've been guilty of them all along the way, and that was cutting our teeth on the experience of learning how to be a great leader and what the team members look for, but then also how to create a performance culture around that supports basically keeping getting better. So yeah,
Yeah,
you learn hard way.
there was definitely a client of mine once, and there was a person that they just had to let go, and it really, but there's like us, we're nice people, we
Yeah,
just can't let people go, and we just hang on and hang on, and eventually got to the point where he, finally made a decision to let go and to let the person go, and as soon as they did that, the amount of people that called back and said, because when they start coming back in, they do recalls and get people back in again. The amount of people is like, oh, I'm glad you got rid of that person because I stopped coming because of that person. And we're
right. Yeah,
talking, within a span of about a month, their business grew by a minimum of about 30%.
yeah, that's huge.
Not from doing anything else
Yeah,
other than like just, and it was all simply because, see, the thing is that you're so hung up on this one person and feeling the guilt or whatever to let someone go. But the problem is that you're taking the hit on the business side of things, and you don't even know it because people move on. You don't even realize they're gone. You don't realize that the business is declining because of that, and it's really hard to see because we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to make sure we hang on to people. We want to make sure that we don't, and it's, let's face it, not only that are we nice people, but the other part is that we don't want confrontation, right? So we're
yeah,
trying to avoid the confrontation, but your business is tanking at the same time and you don't even realize it.
yeah,
And I don't know, I always say, have this line, it's like, we built this business, we built any business, not the point of the business isn't to keep people employed so they
yeah,
can have a job, right? Like, you got to fundamentally remember that, like, we build a business so that we can achieve our mission,
yeah,
right? So our job is to hire people so they can actually help advance that mission quicker,
yeah,
and get there more efficiently. And I think that's really important. And they got to lock that into people, in entrepreneurs, is that we tend to not let go of people quick enough because we're so stuck on avoiding confrontation and avoiding the pain of doing it. It sucks. I will say this.
yeah,
I will say firing someone. I've done it twice. It is the one of the worst feelings in the world. Right? It
yeah,
sucks. But I do believe that most businesses will go through it at least
yeah.
once or twice in their lifetime.
Yeah, well, look, right now there are massive layoffs that are occurring, and fundamentally it's the principle of having to cut off the branch to save the tree. So it's out of necessity, and so when the financials of a company are threatened, yeah, you're thrust into a situation where you have to make a decision for the livelihood of your organisation. I guess what you're talking about, and what I've also come to understand too, is when you're not in dire straits and you're tolerating, the old principle of you get what you tolerate. If you're tolerating an element of underperformance by virtue of the fact that you as a leader aren't making the best decisions for your business or your company, that's ultimately going to hurt you. It's going to derail your vision and keep you further away from what you're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
And I think firing fast, like we'll go with that too as well. Is that there's one golden rule that I've listened to, which is, I think is really important, is that if you had to let someone go and it's a surprise to them,
yeah,
that's on you.
yeah,
And meaning, like, what that really means is that it should never be a surprise to the person who you're
yeah,
letting go, because there should have been ample warning to let them know, like, you're not performing, you're not performing, and they're not changing. So when you do let them go, it shouldn't be a surprise to them. But if it's a surprise to
yeah,
them, then you definitely haven't done your job to let them know that they have not been equipped, or they're not been performing at their best. And so that's why I think that's a good golden rule to kind of live by.
Yeah, I think it's really good. It was, I mean, Jack Welch used to do that years ago in GE, when but he used to have a much stricter policy where he would fire the bottom 5% of organisation every year. But fundamentally, I remember him saying that he goes, That's right. It should never come as a surprise to them, and it's actually cruel to keep people in a role. I mean, yeah, there was probably element of justification in that action by Jack in there as well, but there's an element of what you're saying that I took out of what he said then as well, and that was invariably you're not being honest with people. If they're not suited to that role and they're underperforming, you're compromising something, either their progress or the viability of your business, and that's not actually being honest and transparent.
I think that another mistake as we're going through some of this stuff is, and this, I think it's easier to go through mistakes, is the mistake of overestimating someone's value.
Mm.
And I think when you're hiring someone, oftentimes we see, because you, like you said, we see the good in people, and the tendency of that is that we see the potential of that, what that person is. But the reality is, I think, is that we can see the potential, and we look in the good in people, so therefore we see the potential. The challenge is that, do they rise to the top? Do they rise to their own potential? And the reality is that most people, everybody has potential, but can they do it? Like, can they reach their potential is the challenge. I mean, and that's in a personal endeavors and also professional endeavors. That's why I look for character and personality,
Yeah,
because if the character and the personality doesn't have the drive in them to reach or come close to their potential, then having potential is useless. How many, like, let's use athletes as an example. How many athletic prospects that are drafted to be the top, first round, draft pick in any particular sport, fizzled, never made it
yeah,
to living up to the potential. It happens every single year in every single sport. It happens all the time. They have all the skill set. They also have all the attributes in terms of physicality, but it comes down to, like, do they have the heart? And
yeah,
does they have the heart? Can they translate the heart into action? And sometimes, like, the best of the best are the ability to be the people who perform. Like, I mean, you look at let's say the greatest basketball player, the Michael Jordan, the Kobe Bryants, right? They weren't great. Yeah, were they extreme, amazing athletes? Yes, of course. Were they fit for their roles in terms of size from basketball? Yes, they were. But you know what made the difference? Why were they the greatest of all time? Was because they worked at it. They trained
mm,
at it, right? Someone who was similar. I mean, Michael Jordan is a classic story. He was cut from their high school basketball team, right? So
mm,
he wasn't the greatest player back then, but it took time for him to develop and so on and so forth. And that is what that matters, right? Wayne Gretzky being in hockey, say, for example, you know, he wasn't big. He's a small player comparatively to, he was quite young. He became great because he just kept on working at it and working at it, and had the discipline to. Where someone else, sometimes I think that we live in this entitlement world where sometimes we think we're so good at something, we're physical, beings that to help in one particular sport, or think we're smart enough, we don't have to try hard. And when you don't
yeah,
try hard, that becomes the problem. And I think that's the main distinction between, sorry, I mean, had this one thought I want to share, which is like the danger of with kids and younger kids, right? It's like the danger is saying that you're smart. And I think that's a massive danger, right? Because as soon as you think you're smart, it becomes a problem, because then you go, well, I don't have to try. But in reality,
mm,
we both know it's nothing to do with how smart or not smart you are. It actually has everything to do with effort, right? Because
yeah,
the effort is what changes you, right? And being smart, as soon as you come up with a failure at one point, then all of a sudden it goes, you tell a story, oh, must not be smart anymore. But that's not true. It's just that you may not
yeah,
have put effort into that test or that exam or whatever. And that's the problem. It's the effort that you put in is so much better than the, thinking that you're good or not good at any given thing.
yeah. Laurence, yeah, that was a great, that last couple of minutes or so of what you were talking about. Honestly, I've got about 65 comments and ideas that have just come out of this room, and we could go in any different direction. So I have to discipline myself to just bring it back to team,
Yeah, this is the
specifically
multiverse.
because it is, it's a multiverse, right? So in a multiverse, we'll be splitting out in multiple screens, and we go into each and every one of those. Specifically, what you said about, I'm going to bring it to team, right? And
Thank you
I
for
reckon
bringing this back, by the way.
no, 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 no. Look, I love it. Obviously, because I go there and I sometimes go, no, look, just rein it back in, bring it in, Jim, because I could talk to you for hours about a whole lot of other things. But in this context, I want to talk about what you said about Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan, phenomenal in there. So it raises the concept of a team of champions versus a champion team. Because a lot of the time, individually, you can have people who may or may not be getting the best out of themselves. And Michael Jordan, in his capacity, did. So what is it that separates a group of Michael Jordans? And we've seen that time and time again, where you have people who get together who on the surface look brilliant, fantastically, should thrive, and yet they're beaten by a champion team. People who had characteristics, traits, attributes, habits that cause them to over-exceed. And I think over-excel, I should say. I think if you've ever come across a guy called Patrick Lencioni, who wrote a
Yes.
book called
He's
The
a
Five
great
Dysfunctions of
author
a
on
Team.
teams. Yep.
Yeah, and fundamentally, that to me is the baseline of what separates great teams versus teams that aren't. Right. So
Absolutely.
for people who haven't got familiarity with it, it's a great concept, great paradigm. It's basically he talks about 5 steps that are really important. You fundamentally have to have trust. Next level, you have to have honesty. Next level, I think, was commitment. Fourth was accountability, and fifth was results. So effectively, so I'll say that again. It's basically you've got to have trust. Next level up was honesty. Next level was commitment. Next level was accountability, and next level was results. So if we look at that as a concept, we've kind of touched on that, and we probably haven't spoken about the trust component, Laurence, where perhaps you could talk about that. How important is trust in your team? Whether it's the culture, whether there are expectations, where you can rely on someone to do what they said they. How important can you talk to that? As a
I
concept?
think, I'm going to share with one story, and then we'll kind of lean back into trust. So make sure I come back to that. Like, I
Okay.
want to continue the story about Michael Jordan, what you said about champions and a champion and versus champions teams. Like Michael Jordan, if you look at his career, let's face it, I hated the Bulls because that was my brother's team. I was a Lakers fan. I was more of a Magic team. So the reality was that, when you think about the Bulls were, when Michael Jordan got drafted, his first couple of years, he was great, but he never won anything. And that was the big difference. So he never won anything because he was a great individual. It wasn't until they brought in the coach, Phil Jackson. It wasn't until they brought in the Scottie Pippens, the Dennis Rodmans, and all those people coming together, like working together, that actually created the championship team that won all those championships, right? And so coming back to what you said around the trust is that if you don't have trust, if your teammates don't have trust within yourselves, there's no way they're going to be able to accelerate. There's no way they're going to be able to get to the next level. And that trust is like it's in trust is it's not tangible, right? You gotta trust. It's like you gotta know that you have someone who's going to look after your backside, who's going to be able to know that
Yeah.
they're always going to be there. And the teams that I know, I follow the sports teams I have, like there's, I follow certain teams, like 49ers is one of them. And it's like, you can just tell when the team is gelling, when you got a team of
Yeah.
54, people, like you can tell because there's trust in them in terms of what they do. I think that's really important. Trust is a massive, massive factor because, you, like I said earlier, let's bring this back to earlier what we said. Each person on the bus has to have a certain role. The trust needs to be that the other team members are doing their role and performing their job. Because
Yeah.
if you don't have trust in the other people doing their job, then all of a sudden you have to not only do your job, you have to also worry about the other people. And that's a huge problem, right? And then that's when, because that little bit lack of trust leads into other things of them going, well, if I can't trust them in that, then I can't trust them in this. And
Yeah.
then there's no cohesion, and that really affects the culture.
Yeah. When you talk to people who have been parts of, whether it's people who have been in the military, whether they've been in sporting teams, whether when you watch a high performing team, there's a buzz about them. There's a trust. It's like, hey, I know that's your specific role. I can trust you to execute that. You've got my left and right flank covered. That gives me confidence and certainty. So then that elevates me. I don't know if you've ever had that scenario, Laurence. I know I certainly have, where I didn't have full trust in a team member. So consequently, it took me out of what I should have been doing because I was second guessing, or not second guessing, but I was worrying about whether they were doing that correctly. So fundamentally, it took me out of my power zone. And so for me, it was like the reason why trust is important is because I can focus on my skill set and the highest and best use of my skills and talents because I know that those complementary skills are taken care of. If I don't, I've got an open file in my brain that takes me out of power zone.
it takes up RAM, right? And like, let's
Yeah,
bring it back to the personal side, which we started out the podcast with regards to personal. Like, if you don't have trust if you don't have trust
yeah,
in your significant other, like,
yeah,
how much time? Like, just think about that, right? Because you can it's a good context. If you don't have trust in your significant other, how much energy, time, and emotions are you wasted on worrying about what the
yeah,
other person is going to do? Right?
yeah,
That's what marriage is about, right? If you don't have trust in
yeah,
your marriage, and then you're going to be
yeah,
constantly thinking about it, so you can't move on, it's going to be a slow ride. Remember, what's our goal of a team? The goal of the team is to help you accelerate towards the goal, not to help you create anchors. And I think, the whole point of you have lack of trust, it becomes a massive anchor, and resentment and energy and emotions that are just purely wasted.
yeah. I'm going to give you an example, which basically treads on the toes of a couple of those concepts. When you talk about a team, there was an AFL team in Australia, North Melbourne, who a few years ago, two of their star players were involved in a kerfuffle because there was infidelity in between a player and the wife of another player. So not only did that rock the relationship, but as a team, it tore the team apart because
Right.
fundamentally they went, I don't now have trust. I may have trust on you as a player, but now I don't trust you as a person. So consequently, it unraveled the whole club and the whole team because fundamentally trust as a paradigm was gone. So that it
Yeah.
really does highlight how important that is and how quickly it basically blows up an organization.
Well, it's no different than for people and teams where they are focused more on their individual stats or individual performance than actually where the team is supposed to go. And I think highlight of a good team is when team members are willing to sacrifice their own personal agenda, personal stats, and personal fame or whatever for the sake of winning championships. And I think or winning
Yep.
together. I think that's a huge sign, and that has to be a culture that it needs to be built upon. And that's where where we can end it on here, which is the leadership part, which is like, how do you lead a team to win championships, or how do you lead a team to do great performance? I think it starts with culture, and culture
Yep.
is it's about but who sets the culture is the person who's leading the team. As a
Yep.
leader, I think the fundamental thing is that you need to set the culture of what the team is supposed to look like. I remember listening to a friend of mine who runs two businesses and has a massive team of 1,000 people, and he spent a couple years, like in Thailand, talking about going through Stephen Covey's things, and brought them in as consultants to kind of build the values of the team, and on so on and so forth. And he spent 2 years, and afterwards he goes like, why am I asking what my employees should think about the values of the team? Shouldn't I be the one who created the values of the team? So he threw away 1.5 year, 2 years of consulting work with that team, and go, no, no, here are the values. Here's what we're about. Here's what we, and he's basically set the standard of the values, which are inherent values of the company, and these are the values of what he needs people to be. If you don't like the values, then that's okay, move on. But here's the
Yep.
values, and then sets the culture, and that culture is about having a team leader, and setting the boundaries of what is right and what's wrong. I think that's really important.
Perfect. That's a great example. And that probably does lead up to that next point of Patrick Lencioni's component about trust. From trust is basically honesty and being
Mm.
honest with number one, yourself, which in that example, I think your friend was honest with himself and said, okay, it's about the guidance that I give. And I need to communicate that from my perspective, but then also communicate. And we talked a bit about that in our episode already, was about being honest with people, whether they're performing well or if they're not performing well, and having those tough conversations, which you can't have, I guess, within that context as effective unless you have that baseline of trust. So once you've got that, then you go, okay, how are we honest here? How do we communicate optimally and honestly with each other, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise? And I'm going to tell you that the most impactful conversations that I've quite often have been hard conversations, yes, with employees, but even with friends. But it was because we were prepared to go there that it elevated the quality of the relationship that we had. So I've never been scared of tough conversations on a personal level. I had to learn them in a business sense and purely from the perspective of, so here's the thing that I used to do, Laurence. I'm not sure uh, if it has any relevance, but when you talk about being a go, like I could get stuff done and I worked at 130% of my intensity, what I did, I had an expectation that people could do the same. And when they didn't, what I did, and it was because I had a coach at the time who pulled me up on it and said, "Hey, do you know that you're minimizing yourself to make the rest of the team feel comfortable? Right? So you are the
Mm.
one who sets the tone of the organization, not the tail doesn't wag the dog." And that was like, boy, that was a really hard realization to make. And so I got to the point where I went, "Hey, listen, here's where the standard is. I want you to stand by me. If you can't, then great, awesome. It's been awesome and great, but I can't minimize to make you feel comfortable." And that was,
Mm.
I'm going to tell you how massive I think back to that, and it brings up frustration and anger purely because for a longest time I didn't realize I was doing that, and I was
Yeah.
the one who was
Yeah.
compromising the performance of the team.
And yeah, it actually just reminded me of another point on leadership. I think one of the jobs of a leader is to create psychological safety
Safety,
amongst the team.
exactly.
And based on what you sort of said, I think that safety, psychological safety, where it means that the team members need to feel that they can voice their honest opinions without
Hmm.
being reprimanded or being made fun of. I think that's hard to do as a leader, right? To be able to like be honest, but also like, you can have honest feedback. We all want honest feedback, but at the same time, you want to do it in a way where it's not like it's going to bring them to a level where they go, okay, well, I'm not going to do anything then, right? Or they're going to feel bad about themselves. It's like they want, if you want, like, we all say we love to have your feedback, but the reality is we're all human beings, and the staff is not going to want to give you feedback because they don't know how it's going to impact them in their
Hmm.
job, the safety of their job. So that if you can create a culture, an environment where there is psychological safety, where if that person says, "Hey, Mary's not doing their job," or Mary's like, screwing around, doing other things, they need to feel comfortable. They can say that to you. If they don't
Yeah,
feel that safety, there's no way they can tell you. And so therefore this things goes on. And then when you do find out about Mary, why didn't anybody tell me? Well, because it's not
yeah,
because they didn't want to, it's because you didn't create an environment that allowed them to feel safe to do that. So I
yeah,
think that's a really
totally.
important element to a kind of culture we do.
Yeah,
Jim, like this has been like I hope that everybody's been getting a lot. I do not know that you guys have been getting a lot of tons of value from just today's podcast in regards to all the trials and tribulations of building a team, leading a team, and creating a team. And I hope that you can take these ideas and then implement them and ask yourself the tough question, which is, have I been doing that so far?
mm,
And if you haven't, what changes do I need to make moving forward? Because it does take time. It's not going to say that, so, when this in the snap of a finger, everything's going to change. But I encourage you to look at teams as an important value of your business, but more importantly, hiring and recruiting the right players in your team is actually way more important than just hiring team for team's sake. So
yeah.
that's the thing that I want to kind of leave. Is there any lasting thoughts or things that you want to add to this?
No, I think we covered it. It's a big topic, and we wanted to address it, but not basically say, look, it's the end of the road. This is like guidelines and tools. The whole process of leadership and team is an ongoing process, and you get better at it the more you do, and pardon me, the better you get at it, the more you apply yourself. So, no, that'd be the only thing I'd add on top of that, Laurence.
Okay, excellent. Well, despite so many technical difficulties and issues that we had during this podcast, you probably may or may not notice, even if you're listening. So, but the people who are watching the video, and you would notice that I change backgrounds because I'm that good. I'm able to kind of switch backgrounds in an instant in the middle of the podcast. But anyways, I hope that you guys enjoyed this today, and I really love to hear some feedback from you guys on round teams and what you guys are thinking about that. Like always, please like and subscribe to us on various podcast channels and YouTube and on video. And if you feel like these are valuable to you and your team members or other entrepreneurs or other business people, please share this with others so that will really help us out. But more importantly, it will actually benefit them from the content we're creating. All right. Until next week, we'll speak to you soon.
Bye bye.